They called Bridget at 6 and suggested we meet for dinner. We agreed. When we met them, it was apparent that they had had a day like no other. The first thing Clarence did was hand me back my cell phone. Bridget and I could tell they were in a really good mood. It was fun watching them walk into a place where we were. Heidi said, spreading themselves throughout the location looking for Trey. They must have wasted an hour at Macy's. Dena was so well known publicly, there were people taking pictures of her everywhere. People were shocked that a lady of her status would be caught in a place like that. They had all sorts of questions, which only slowed down their progress. You could tell she was frustrated. Each stop they went to, it got worse for them. Once they showed up, we turned the GPS off, Clarence said with a laugh after the fourth time we heard one of her entourage say, "He's not as dumb as she has convinced herself to believe. He's having us chase a ghost for some reason." That comment made both Bridget and me smile. Bridget's parents had been followed around all day. Each stop was further down the social ladder for Dena and her entourage. It made me wonder if Dena would clue into what was really happening if she ever got to talk to me again. I knew that one of the excuses she would use was, "I did it all for you." As we ate our dinner, we explained what had happened since Dena got served. Bridget said to her parents, "We were talking last night about our relationship going forward." Trey said, "Do you think we can put the needs of the other first like they did?" I said that they had been working at it for years. "What you don't know, Mom and Dad, is that we were both talking about you." Clarence got a big smile on his face, his wife got teary-eyed. "I got my clothing and personal items out and back to Bridget's house thanks to your help," Bridget said. "I had to try every piece on," I said. "What your daughter thought didn't compliment me got put in a pile for Goodwill. We dropped them off on the way here." "Get used to it, Trey," Clarence said. "I've been married to her mother for 35 years, and my wife still does it, Dad," Bridget said. He responded, "What we all know is the truth." Both her father and I started to laugh. I want to pay for the meal, and her father wanted to stop me. It ended up with both of us holding the ticket, so I said, "Let us. You have already done so much for us today, so give us a chance to show you our appreciation." Clarence just listened to him. HY said, "He wants to be your equal. You wanted to be treated the same way by my dad. Do you want to play the game of one-upmanship with him? Remember, it took years for my dad and you to come to an understanding." Clarence smiled, and so did I. We both had to admit she was right. That wisdom over the years has talked me through a lot of things. Each time she does it, it's done out of love and with a knowledge that sees things from both sides. Some of my greatest accomplishments have come because I listened to her. With that said, he took his hand off the ticket. Bridget whispered, "Thanks, Dad." Bridget's mother's face glowed in a visible blush before she said, "Don't worry about these two, they're going to make it. After all, he is like us, made from the Missouri red clay. He will listen to reason like you always have and won't be corrupted into believing perception." Dena Richards was exhausted. It had been a day of chasing a ghost around the city. Every time they located him, he was gone. She felt that after a few hours, they would be able to sit down and talk about why he had gotten it all wrong. Perhaps there was a chance that she could have the operation reversed, since it appeared to be the problem that had started all of this. Now, all she wanted to do was go home and soak in the tub. Thankfully, the event she had to attend, she could sit and allow others to come to her. Otherwise, she would not have made it through the early part of the evening. The posts of the event and what she had found interesting had been received well because of the long day. She had come home early. It was when her entourage dropped her off that she realized they all had been played. The bay doors of the garage were open, Trey's pride and joy was gone. He had outmaneuvered them all. It was he who had them all looking like fools. Entering the house, she found the garage door opener and the house keys. When she set down her purse, walking into the spare bedroom, she saw that most of his clothing was gone. To Dena, that was the moment she realized there was no hope. Trey had found a way to move on with his life. It was then that she realized that in the pursuit of her dream, she had slowly driven him out of her life. Dena was sitting in the dark, crying because, in her own way, she truly still loved Trey in a big way. She began to realize it was who and what she associated with that had pushed her directions, activities, and thoughts as she built her new persona. Dena had never seen that in doing so, she had lost sight of who and what she was. Bridget clicked the garage door opener as I backed my car in. We had been so busy talking about the dinner we had shared with her parents that we forgot to check to see if anyone was home at my former residence. Sunday, we got up early and went out for the day again. It was a day of discovery that drew us closer. It was almost 10 at night by the time we got back. As soon as we were in the house, Bridget took the roast beef out and started making the sandwiches for me to take to work. "What do you want on them?" Bridget asked. "Butter and a little bit of salt and pepper," I said. "Anything else makes the bread soggy by lunchtime." I watched her make 3 sandwiches for me and placed them in separate Ziploc bags. Then, taking a brown sandwich bag out, she wrote my name on it. Bridget saw me tear up. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing, I just see you packing my lunch for what it is," I replied. "That's all?" "What's that?" "My mom still does it for my dad all the time," Bridget replied. "A simple act that is done out of love," I replied. "Mom, after she caught me with my head on your shoulder sound asleep, warned me that you had a gentle soul." I asked her why it was a warning. She replied, "My grandfather was like that, and he and grandmother had 10 children. I couldn't help it." I started laughing and said, "Those were the days before birth control, and it was the twinkle in his wife's eyes that caused it all to start." She had just finished cleaning up when her phone rang. Her dad, worried about the neighbor, had arranged for a limo to pick us up and drop us off at work for the next month. Talking her into my arms, I leaned down and kissed her passionately. She responded in kind. Slowly, things progressed as we began moving slowly to the bedroom. It was time, and we were ready. It was a night when we both put the needs of the other first. By the time we were done discovering all we could about each other, it was almost time to get up. While showering together for the first time as we got ready for the day, the first time as a couple, I washed her body down. She went to work glowing in frustration because by the time I was done, she was just as ready as I was to hop back into bed. The limo dropped me off at my firm first. I was wearing a black pinstriped suit for the first time with my briefcase. I was carrying the bag lunch Bridget had made for me. On the way to my office, I stopped at our lunching room to put my bag in the fridge. The receptionist, who was making the first pot of coffee for the day, looked at me and whistled. "A new suit, a new image, and a huge smile so early in the morning," she said. "Who is she, and how long has it been going on?" I just laughed and responded, "What makes you think it's that?" "Maybe it's just being free from the past." "No, Trey, you have the look of a man who is discovering real love for the first time," she said. "I'm happy for you and her. I hope she feels the same way." I was in the lunching room eating the first of my 3 sandwiches at the mid-morning point when the receptionist came and said, "Are you expecting a client this morning?" "No, Mondays are usually set aside for reviewing my client accounts to make sure they're still heading in the right direction." "Emerson Stevens is here wanting to talk to you," she said. "What should I tell him?" "Tell him where I am," I said, "and find me a cup he can use." When Emerson came in, I stood up to greet him. "Well, Trey, you're finally dressing for success." "I like the new look," he laughed. "Roast beef sandwiches that are homemade, I'm impressed." "I guess you're here to talk about Dena," I said. "How are you and the better half handling it?" I broke the news to her Friday afternoon right after getting a copy of your divorce papers. "Did you know that my wife has a sister just as dirty and conniving as Dena?" he explained. "I told her that you had warned me about what she had done to prepare me. She wants you to know that we will always consider you part of the family." Emerson explained, "The New York Times has an interesting story about Dena and her entourage running all over the city Saturday looking for something that they couldn't find. They were wondering why she was out of her normal high society spots and slumming down. Guilty is charged." "I needed to get my clothing out of the house," I said. By the time I got home Friday night, she and her entourage were already there, so I had someone holding my cell phone with the GPS on. Figuring she knew someone who could track it. Just so you know, Dena believes you have found someone new, Dad explained, because you had to have help to pull off what you did. All of your contacts that she knew said they hadn't heard from you all weekend. She blames the person who helped you for making her look like a fool. She is bound and determined that when she finds her words not mine, she's going to put her in the hospital. Thanks for the warning, Dad. She's right, because she pushed the two of us together. They were best friends for years, I said. Both Mom and you have met her a few times. It started after I had moved to the spare bedroom because Dena felt I needed to be watched, so whatever I did or said did not interfere with her agenda. So Dena asked Bridget to monitor my movements and thinking while she came up with a scheme to defuse the situation she had pushed us into. He sat there looking at me for a few minutes and said with seriousness, Dora, and I think the world of Bridget. Do Clarence and Grace know they were the ones moving around the city with my cell phone? I said, over dinner they said it was the best fun they had in years. To be honest, neither Bridget nor I were looking for a relationship, but the situation we were both put in by Dena caused us to be together a lot, and it happened. Trey, do you think it's going to get serious between the two of you, or my father-in-law asked. I was on my way home on Friday to have the locks changed when Bridget informed me Dena and her entourage were already there waiting to confront me when I got home. I ended up staying the weekend at Bridget's. Both of us can see us achieving the kind of life we want, but neither has had my father-in-law picked up his cell phone and called Clarence Smith, setting up a lunch meeting, and then said, I want to see if Clarence and I can get you both out of where you're living. Dena is on the warpath. She believes it's outside interference that has caused all these problems, not her own conduct. Her aunt caused a lot of problems when her marriage broke up and ended up doing time because of her extreme actions. She, like Dena, could not accept responsibility for her own conduct. I think some separation of space might be the best prescription for now, Dad. I read the New York Times gossip lady's articles on Dena to her before I moved to the spare bedroom and said, who am I to argue with the truth of the most respected liberal paper in the United States? I said. Then I asked her to prove to me that she wasn't having an affair, knowing damn well that she couldn't. It hit him for the first time that she, by her own conduct, had built a case against herself. So he said, she marketed herself into millions and out of a marriage at the same time. It's sad that she will never understand that. I was sitting in the little luncheon eating my last 2 roast beef sandwiches at lunchtime when the president walked in. I hear you had Emerson Stevens sitting in here with you this morning. Anything I should be concerned about? No, not really. He was just touching base, catching up on a few things before his lunch and meeting with Clarence Smith, I said as I stood up and closed the door to the room. Off the record, they have been casual acquaintances for years, their daughters used to be best friends, and you have a personal relationship with both if my understanding is right, the president said. That explains a lot of things. Some in the business think their organizations would make a good merger. Sir, I don't get involved with their actual business operations. If they want business advice, I tell them that it's best that I stay out of it because it could cause a conflict of interest and affect my career, I said in a serious tone. But I have offered to put a few experts together if they needed it because I have a few that are good clients. Trey, I think from now on you should just call me by my first name. A man who walks in the shadows of those 2 men is very trusted by them, he said. It also shows what they think of your character. Okay, Gordon, I can do that, I said. As soon as he left the lunching room, I knew and understood fully this game we called life. My boss, based on what his perception saw, had made a decision about me based more on what he assumed than what he knew. It showed to me just how important truth and honesty were because his perception had nothing to do with what I knew to be the truth. Bridget called me around 1 o'clock. Emerson and her father were gone for lunch together, and she wanted to know what was going on. The first thing I told her was how much I had enjoyed my 3 sandwiches, then I explained what Emerson had told me. To Dena, I've become the reason for the end of her marriage, Bridget said. Her perception has distorted the reality of it all. It's sad when one's view won't allow one to see their own part in a situation. Dena is trying to manipulate and control others' view of things, which has caused her to lose the ability to see the truth, I said. It's sad because she has proven that we, as humans, will only see what we want to see. The lies, truth, or facts mean nothing, it's our perception of things that guide our thinking. It's been crazy here, Bridget said. I guess we were seen when we went to Coney Island, so everyone knew, thanks to the gossip, that I was dating. Then my assistant saw my face today and asked who he was and when did you realize that you were in love? I got it too, the receptionist was making coffee when I put my lunch in the fridge. She said I looked like a man who had discovered real love for the first time. I told Dena's father about us this morning and how we got together, his meeting with your dad to figure out a way to get us out of being right next door to Dena. Emerson is worried about us, while there must be something else going on in his wife and his mind, Bridget said. For him to take extreme steps like this, does he believe she's that dangerous? Not to herself, but to us, maybe, I replied, because, like so many in our society, truth, honesty, and the facts don't mean a thing, it's their perception that matters. I think Emerson sees that's what's leading his fear for our well-being. But we haven't done anything but fall in love, thanks to her own interference with our lives. Can't she see that? Bridget stated. Not in her perception, I replied, because she has already erased it from her mind. The silence after my last remark was deafening. Bridget was realizing just how twisted Dena was making this. I knew that Dena believed in her own eyes, that she walked on water and could do no wrong, she had no checks and balances in her life. As a result, she had lost her judgment between what was right or wrong. Finally, after a few moments, Bridget said, our mistake is that, as a result of her conduct, we fell in love. If what we see is right, what price is she going to force us to pay? I really didn't have an answer to her question, and I told Bridget so. Our conversation brought out an understanding of our current situation and how serious it was. Emerson, I believe, has a right to be worried, I said. Neither one of us has a clue as to what Dena will do. Dena Richards was sitting across from her divorce lawyer, who was reading aloud my lawyer's petition grounds for ending the marriage as an annulment. Her lawyer needed Dena to see how bad everything looked on paper. Dena needed to comprehend how serious the situation was. The lawyer realized that most just quickly glanced at the divorce petition and never read it. That was why she was reading it all out to Dena. As she read it, she kept glancing at her client to see how she was responding. She could see that what Trey was saying in his divorce petition was finally registering. The look on her client's face said it all. As she listened, Dena learned for the first time how bad it looked from a neutral point of view. What was being revealed to her as she listened intently for the first time was very damaging and detailed. After reading it all to her, the lawyer set it down on the desk, looking right at Dena. She said, tell me your side of this story from the time you met until now. I'm going to record it for further reference. Why should I do that? Dena asked. Just stop the divorce. We can't stop the divorce, he has a dozen or so reasons for getting it granted. But if he wins an annulment against you, it will be much worse because he will be able to take everything from you if the judge agrees, Janice Cooper stated. Our best way to save anything is to negotiate it all before we go before the judge. His lawyer is a female liberal feminist who is one of the best in the field. She was brilliant in exposing your long-term conduct as a pattern of behavior designed to defraud and avoid the truth. She uses it as a means to expose what your plan may have been all along. She will have no mercy in taking you down. For her, it's a personal case because, in her eyes, you represent everything she hates, Janice stated with authority. Why do you say that? I don't admit to anything except having my tubes tied, Dena said. She sees you as a user with no moral fiber who sells her sexuality for the almighty American dollar. To her, you're just as low and despicable as those working for sex on the mean streets, Janice stressed with a serious voice. The fact that the New York Times' numerous news articles are used as references to validate their points makes their claims that much more credible. The reputation of the Times to most is unquestionable. Can Trey really use all the publicity I got against me to prove what he is implying? Dena asked, they got all the background material from the New York Times using a court order, Janice said, even the photographs, to re-notify them for them to print in the newspaper. They have all the New York Times gossip reporters' personal notes that raise questions about your long-term conduct. Any judge reading the petition will give heavy weight to the New York Times for the credibility of their reporting when presented the way his lawyer did. It makes it appear much worse than what Trey is implying, Janice said. Every piece of gossip caused by witnesses to your conduct or the statements that have been recorded about you and documented by the mass media are being used to strengthen Trey's case. Janice took out 108 by 4 prints of photos for Dena to take a look at. Each one of them was a picture of her with her entourage, all taken under nightclub's dimmed lights while they were on the dance floor, bumping and grinding their flesh. Each one showed Dena in some kind of physical entanglement where her exposed flesh was being fondled, sometimes by more than just one man. The looks in her eyes in the photograph left no doubt that she was apparently enjoying it. No one looking at the photos would deny that she was in a state of sensual or sexual enlightenment, prepared and eager to go further. Further, they were touching her in ways that there was no doubt that she was aroused. The way those pictures are taken, it's quite reasonable to believe that an outright orgy was only a room or two away, Janice said. And that you're nothing but a sex-loving woman went out of the eyes of the public. When it was disclosed in court that they were taken by a New York Times staff photographer, their credibility will not be questioned. The judge will accept it as the unquestionable truth of your active lifestyle. Dena's face went white. She could not even remember who she was with at the time and who was touching her. It might have been just a momentary incident, but that is not what the images implied. If they became public, her social reputation and image could be ruined. The unpublished photographs made her look like she was a living sex doll being passed around. Dena was reminded by Trey's own words, if the New York Times, the most liberal paper in the country, wrote about it or photographed it, it must be the truth, because a newspaper with a history like theirs would have no reason to lie. Your own father gave a notarized statement about you, claiming to all 3 of them that it was medically impossible for you to get pregnant months before you had your operation. It also verifies what Bridget Smith's statement says, Janice pointed out. They raised the question to the court, if she could not get pregnant, what was the need for having your tubes tied? That's why they were able to get the medical reports. The surgeon who tied your tubes verifies it was a last-minute request by you the day before your scheduled operation, and until that moment in time, you could have carried full term. Those facts cannot be argued because Trey has got too much proof, Janice went on to explain. In discussing this case with Trey's lawyer, it's been hinted that they're holding something back to be used when we are all in front of the judge, because it's even more devastating when she presents things like this in court. She is going for a kill, knowing that it will leave the defendant defenseless. By the look on your face, I must believe that you know what it is. Dena was on the verge of crying, but she knew it would do no good, so she said, try to get it sealed so we can't discuss it publicly and see if we can negotiate the rest. I won't fight the divorce. We can try, but your soon-to-be ex is in the driver's seat here, Janice said. You humiliated him, made him a public laughingstock, and your long-term conduct, as they laid it out, makes it appear that it was deliberate. If I was Trey, everything I would do going forward would be done because of the need to get some revenge because of the bathroom jokes being told about him. But he might be willing to talk to me after he has a few days to cool down. After all, we're still married, Dena said. That's not the question. Ask yourself, when did you stop communicating with him as an equal? Janice asked. Because that's the day your marriage ended, whether or not you will admit it. From then on, it was downhill all the way. He saw it happening before you did. That's why you were served as soon as you got off the plane. That question hit Dena hard. She had never thought that they were not communicating. But her lawyer's statement forced her to think back. She stopped being interested in his life when she started the journey to becoming a social media star. Gradually from there, they started drifting apart. Trey worked all day, and she partied a lot of nights. At first, to keep her name out there, he'd leave for work at 5 o'clock in the morning, and she had crawled into bed about 2 hours earlier. She had started this whole journey with that knowledge in the back of her head and had promised herself it would only be 2 nights a week. The more she got into it, the more she wanted it because to her, it was a drug that she started needing. Her lawyer was just stating the facts that everybody could see, but she hadn't. She had been too busy chasing the dream to realize she was walking out of the marriage in her own way. Now, it had turned into this nightmare. "Okay then, what about it's my body, and it's my right to do with it what I want," replied Dena. "That's why Trey will be granted the annulment with no questions asked," said Janice. Dena left her lawyer's office devastated, realizing that her husband, Trey, was using the social media hype she created for himself to undermine her. The judge has to rule that Trey had the right to know that you were not going to reproduce and have children before you married him. Instead, you lied to him and came up with a plan to make sure it was impossible for you to reproduce. It was essentially a numbers game, but it had worked so well that she had taken her friend the editor of the New York Times advice on how to manipulate the masses to create an image. He continued, "That's all, 3 out of 10 will not buy it, and the rest will. Those who don't fall in line will be tagged as degenerates or haters. It forces their silence. History has proven time and time again that branding them that way works well. We use it all the time to increase our circulation, which drives advertising revenue up. Another trick that we use quite well is by accusing naysayers of what we have already done because it takes eyes away from one's own conduct. Always remember that 70% of those who believe you will buy your lies as truth." The same delusion she created to promote her career as a social butterfly was condemning her to damnation hell on earth. When the divorce was finalized, she wondered if it would still be worthwhile. Trey was demonstrating to her that he wasn't the idiot she had gradually come to believe he was. By remaining silent and standing there, he gave her the sense of freedom that came with leading the life she had chosen, pushing her beyond her initial goals. Now, she was experiencing the results of her own actions. Whether or not her actions were true was no longer relevant. What mattered was the impression that she left on the world. What was perceived as the unadulterated reality was her own creation. The actions she took to create the illusion she desired were now being used against her. It was now accepted as gospel by the mainstream media and her devotees, who had bought into it. She failed to see the negative aspects of the reputation she was gaining. Trey hadn't defeated Dena, rather, it was her own calculated acts and deeds to promote the idea on social media that garnered the attention she so desperately needed. Even though it was done innocently, it created a perception that was impossible to refute, making the lies true and the truth false. Her having her tubes tied was actually the only real transgression against her husband. She was unable to provide a credible explanation for her actions due to the New York Times' reputation among its readership. She looked over what her lawyer had read to her and realized he hadn't disclosed the most serious thing she'd done, as she flagged down a cab to take her to her soon-to-be ex's workplace. She wanted to know why Trey had kept it a secret if he was truly out for revenge, which he would have been. Maybe he hadn't learned. Dena found herself standing across the street from Trey's office tower at around 5 o'clock in the evening. She wanted to see if he would be willing to go through the divorce quietly and agree to keep it out of the news, so she was hoping she would be able to catch him leaving the building. He had to swear to secrecy if she was to keep anything that she had worked so hard to create. If he did of what she suspected he might not have, he couldn't tell if the court had sealed the case. Dena saw the limo pull up about 10 minutes past the hour. She witnessed Bridget, a friend from before, leaving with both her father and hers. As Bridget excitedly entered the building, her excitement was evident on her face, which was radiant. Why were the three of them together, Dena wondered. It was obvious that her father and Clarence were now friends. She questioned what had connected those two extremely strong men. It took Dena roughly 20 more minutes to find out. While their fathers waited, chatting and enjoying a cigarette, she had observed Bridget entering. Trey finally emerged. The issue was that he wasn't by himself because Bridget was allowing him to hold her hand. As they emerged through the doorway, she observed them. Bridget's face was radiant. She could tell who the other woman was who had taken her husband by the way the two of them exchanged glances. The way they gazed at one another made it clear that they were a couple in love. The thing that hurt the most was that she had purposefully used her ex-best friend to maintain control of the situation. Life had thrown them all a curveball, and she had forced them together. Dena had to tell herself that she had not anticipated this to occur. She smiled briefly as she watched them from across the street, remembering the times when their playful side would come out and they would act a little crazy. Because Bridget was her name, he had always referred to it as a Bridget moment. It was a bitter pill for Dena to swallow, as it made her face how foolish she had been to use the resources the New York Times editor had taught her. As he stated, lies and truth are only tools to be used when using perception to create a collective thought. She assumed she would have it all. She had underestimated the power of persuasion as a novice when forming an opinion that most people would accept as true. As Dena watched her husband and Bridget get into the limo, tears welled up in her eyes. She had never recognized Trey's individuality until now. He had never in his life followed the herd or accepted the views or desires of the majority. He had always identified as an outsider who went by himself. She was seeing firsthand how simple it was to influence people to believe what you wanted them to because of what was now taking place in her life. All that was required was a series of repeated movements and statements until it was assimilated by the sponges, who lacked the mental capacity to filter out the food they were being fed. To truly appreciate that fact, one must realize that most people would rather focus on taking care of themselves and their families and get by than stop to consider important issues. The majority had not been properly trained to think independently when they were young. Dena's issue stemmed from Trey's constant need to believe something. Trey needed to establish it on his own. As Dena watched them both drive off, memories of the moment she asked Bridget if she knew her boyfriend flashed through her mind. That was all that was needed for her to accept that Bridget was correct. Based on what I have learned about him these last few weeks, I would say definitely not. Bridget's response had said that. She had forgotten everything about Trey. A tall man with a little stick in his hand who would only bend slightly more than that. He drew a line and stuck with it. Dena had made up her mind that Trey would have revealed her secret if he had known about it. It therefore allowed her time to ensure he never would. The clinic would disclose what it was when she signed to have it done, but medical records would only list it as a birth control procedure. These kinds of forms weren't sent to billing, instead, they were retained in the official records. The realization that Trey would always look for the truth because of who he was made Dena's body tremble and shook. He was and always would be self-sufficient. Because he had not adopted the collective mindset, he was not subject to the rules of human behavior as taught by the editor of the New York Times. He valued free thought. The four of us, Clarence, Emerson, Bridget, and I, were heading out for dinner. As soon as we got in the limo, the champagne was poured. For some reason, the two of them wanted to celebrate. Both of their wives were already headed to where we were going. There was a lot of discussion about business and what to do going further, as they both wanted to focus on their families rather than money. Impressed over my suggestions over the dinner conversation, Clarence asked, "Does Trey always look at things from all sides like this, with forward thinking, before making a decision?" "Yes, he does, Dad," Bridget said in pride. After he learned of Dena's treachery and asked me for a statement, he explained right down to the littlest detail to me what he was thinking and why. It surprised me that he was so frank and honest about it. No man has ever communicated in a completely open and honest way with me. It made him completely different from any man I had known. I looked at her with a look of puzzlement because I had never seen myself as different. That night, I saw that he was behaving in the same manner as you would, Dad. I didn't learn until later that he was raised out of state, Bridget explained. That's when I started to learn that he was not the man that Dena was leading me to believe he was. It took me a while to realize that she had been manipulating all who came into her life for a long time, including me, about what kind of person he is, and that we had to accept her reality of him as the truth. Trey has a thinker's mind, and when he's dealing with an issue, he will openly discuss all things, good and bad, about it before making a decision and take into consideration your opinions, Bridget continued. I learned that it is his way of mentally preparing himself for anything. A few minutes later, Emerson clarified, "Dena is like my wife's sister in a lot of ways." She decided that the woman who was involved with her ex-husband had to hurt just as much as she did, so she drove over her ex-husband's legs 3 times before she stopped the car. That's why we have been so concerned, Trey, Dora continued. She was found to have a mental health issue. The stress, the anger, and the emotions coming out caused a break. It took him 3 years and 6 operations to heal, but to this day, he requires the use of a cane to walk with. Our family history, until Dena gets professional help, we can't take the chance that she will be all right going through the divorce. Bridget grasped my arm. There will be no driving your car for a while. I don't want to give her the chance to be near you in any way. We talked about small issues while remaining light-hearted. Dena walked up to Bridget's house with an envelope in her hand. She was stopped as she began to walk up the driveway by a man who got out of a car. "Miss Richard, I'm sorry to inform you that no one is allowed on the property," he responded. "I'm now asking you to turn around and remove yourself." "I was just going to leave this letter at the door," Dena responded. "I can't allow you to do that, we have strict orders," he responded. "May I escort you off the property? I suggest that you either mail it or have a courier service deliver it." Dena identified the security company as one that her father had frequently used in the past when necessary. Her parents had threatened to take legal action against her if they did not realize she was seeing a professional. When Dena realized that her parents no longer even trusted her, she broke down in tears. She decided to have it picked up by a courier and delivered to Trey's office while she was walking home. She'd start packing tonight, whatever she could get out of the house. She had an agent who would show her a few properties that might be for sale and fit her tastes before she had to leave tomorrow. She wasn't feeling festive, what with everything going on in her life at the moment. After giving it some thought, Bridget and I decided to accept the offer from her father's and my father's in-laws while riding the bus to work. I entered the building with my 3 roast beef sandwiches in a brown bag along with my briefcase. Everything was going well that day until the receptionist stopped me on my way to get another cup of coffee in the afternoon and gave me an envelope that had been couriered in. It came from Dena. Rather than throwing it in the trash as I had originally thought, I placed it on the corner of my desk and carried on with my day. A few minutes later, Bridget called, and I told her that Dena had sent an envelope by courier to the office. "What did it say?" she wanted to know. I answered that I wasn't sure if I would open it and that I hadn't even opened it yet. Bridget persuaded me to take it home with me so that we could decide what to do together. I read the letter right after dinner. It said, "Trey, looking back after seeing Bridget and you together, I realized too late that I had pushed you out of my life long before I had my tubes tied. I lost sight while chasing the dream of what was important in my life. Even my getting my tubes tied has to be tied into my chasing my dream because I really did not consider the consequences of what I was really doing." Bridget, when I asked her if I knew her boyfriend, said I didn't. I just now am beginning to see how true that is. In honesty, you did not leave me, I left you willingly because of what I did without discussing it with you. Mom and Dad demanded that I seek professional help, please tell them that I have set up my first appointment. I'm still not sure if I will go, but I am considering it. I have a real estate lady looking for new digs for me and have begun packing to move. When I saw the 2 of you together as you walked together towards the limo, I realized that we never looked like the 2 of you do together. It's got me questioning our relationship and wondering if we were ever in love. I may never know the answer to that. I would like to have our divorce sealed so that everything is kept out of the New York Times and other media that I am beginning to hate. My lawyer said your lawyer had built such a detailed case that there are 6 or 7 different reasons for granting the divorce. I won't be fighting it as long as you are reasonable about it. Forever yours, Dena. Do you think she's being sincere or not? Bridget asked after glancing at me. I'm not sure, I said. She just might be living proof that you can't fix stupid. My problem is that based on the long-term lies, how can I not believe this is just not more of her? I can see why she needs to keep it quiet, she does not want the real reason why she got her tubes tied to come out. That little piece of information we kept out of the divorce petition as a bargaining chip if things went really bad. What could she have done that's worse than what we already know? Asked Bridget. She aborted what would have been our firstborn 8 weeks before, at a hospital-owned clinic, I responded. My lawyer and I kept that private because I did not want her parents to know. For some reason, her body would not accept any kind of birth control, and she refused to use inserts because they always caused woman problems for her. Bridget stared at me with tears in her eyes before responding, I presume you found out when you sued for her records? Yes, I did. I decided to leave it out because I had promised to tell Emerson everything. I said I just couldn't devastate my in-laws with that truth. So, I informed them just what they needed to know. Why do you feel they need protecting? Bridget inquired as to why I felt compelled to behave in this manner. Emerson and Dora are traditional Christian conservatives who follow their beliefs, I retorted, fully aware that revealing the whole truth would upend their world and permanently alter their reality. Bridget looked at me, taking in the gravity of what I said and sensing that I felt overwhelmed. I was a man who wanted children of my own who had to ask myself, would I want to know if I was them? The answer I came to, no. I gathered Bridget into my arms and held her close. It surprised me to find that she knew, but for some reason she felt compelled to whisper in my ear, let it go. Don't hold yourself accountable for something that was beyond your control. I finally did, and she responded, did we ever know Dena at all? What kind of woman would do that to her husband and parents, one who has it all and is so jealous of anyone ever getting a part of what would belong to her by birthright, her father's millions? I responded, now you know why I am so confused as to what I should do. Then agree to keep it quiet, Bridget replied. I looked at Dena and grinned, saying, we really don't want media attention with what Dena's father and mine are attempting to do. I picked up my phone and texted her, I will instruct my lawyer to get it sealed, Bridget. I'm going to send this to both your father and Emerson as an email in the morning from work. I feel that have a right to know, saying, that was not on my mind, but your thinking is right. Then I will do the same to my lawyer to have it sealed, I replied. The remainder of the week passed without incident. New York Times reports expressed concern that Dena's behavior had not changed, despite being more reserved, she was still regarded as the social butterfly. The gossip columnist implied that she was acting in her typical manner as a result of the ongoing, finalized divorce. The gossip columnist for the New York Times was openly questioning why I had asked for that, considering that I had been the one dumped in public. I sent Clarence and Emerson a list of 10 names of people who I knew would be interested in doing an interview, along with some background information. Emerson gave me a call late on Friday afternoon to let me know that Dena was, in fact, seeing a professional. He had been keeping tabs on her ever since he got a copy of her letter to me, and he verified that she had made her first appointment. Bridget's and my old house had a for sale sign put on it on Saturday afternoon. We had formal permission from Dena's attorney to sell the house. It surprised Bridget and me that there was no sign of Dena at all. We woke up on Saturday night to the sound of a loud explosion. After throwing on some clothes, Bridget and I hurried outside to find my former house completely engulfed in flames. The air smelled of natural gas. A young man in handcuffs was being held by one of the security officers. The security guard said, "Fire department and police are on their way." "It looks like he hit the wrong house, maybe, but I wouldn't be so sure," I replied. "Yeah, that's right, there was a clinic fire a few days ago," the security guard replied. Bridget looked at me in shock as I said, "Please make sure that a police officer talks to me as soon as possible because if I am right, there may be another fire in the next few days." Bridget looked at me questioningly, so I added, "My lawyer's office." It has been ruled as a case of arson. The only area totally destroyed was the record room and their computer system. It was run in partnership with the hospital. She took my hand and we walked back into Bridget's house. Upon entering, she replied, "You don't think Dena is behind this, do you?" "For me, the question is that I can't say she's not," I responded, "so I feel obligated to inform the police so that they can decide for themselves if they feel they need to check it out." With her big signing bonus, she could afford it. The detective knocked on our door after about an hour. When I answered, I ushered him inside. I told him why I thought my ex-wife, Dena Richards, was behind it, and he took notes. "I recognized the name, but I can't picture the face," he replied. "Do you have a photo?" Bridget texted him one of the few remaining pictures she had of Dena after asking for his phone number. I got out my briefcase, found the abortion record, and gave it to him while she was working on it. It was obvious to him that the form she had signed was for an abortion and came from the clinic that had been set on fire. I informed him that my lawyer's office would likely be the next place targeted if my suspicions were correct. He took a close look at the record and asked, she wanted to hide the record of the abortion, for what reason, while taking a picture of it with his phone. Dena Richards, my soon-to-be ex-wife, is Emerson Stevens' only child, I said. If he found out what she had done because of his religious beliefs, she would lose all rights to an inheritance. Emerson is a man who believes that life begins at conception and would write his daughter out of his life. His expression became extremely serious as he gave everything time to register. I'm grateful for the information. You're right, Dena Richards has definitely become a person of interest. It gives me a great starting point when I begin interrogating the man we are now holding. I thank you for waiting up for me. Now I have to go wake up the detective that's investigating the clinic fire to see what he has found out so that we can compare our notes. We would never have been able to link the two together without the information you have provided. The detective and I shook hands as I led the way to the door, and I locked up behind him. Sunday morning it was already 5 o'clock. Too alert to sleep, Bridget and I crawled back into bed and cuddled while we worked through everything. It would come to light later that I was not entirely incorrect. The noises from our cell phones must have woken us both up, so we must have fallen asleep. Bridget answered hers, and I answered mine. Everyone was in a panic. Put your speaker on, dear, and we will talk to both sides of the family at once. The morning news had carried it. After making sure we were all okay, Clarence, Gracie, Dora, and Emerson wanted to find out what we knew. I informed them that the man had been apprehended by the hired security team, but they believed he had struck the wrong residence. We didn't know anything else going into it. Gracie stated, Dena moved out on Thursday. She bought a 4,000 square foot furnished apartment near downtown and got a short closure. She said her movers packed her up what she wanted and moved it. They were done early Friday afternoon. Bridget and Trey, pack your clothing, you're moving in with us, Grace stated. This is getting scary. At least here we can close the gates and secure the property. Do you want Clarence and me to come and help you? No, Mom, Bridget replied. Trey and I can handle it. We will just bring what we need to get through a couple of weeks, if that's okay with you. We had put this house up for sale yesterday anyway. Between the two of us, we filled my full-size sedan up, using both the trunk and the back seat. I had to laugh because I was feeling like a vagabond. I called the detective before we left to tell him what I had found out and to suggest that the security guards had been correct to believe that the arsonist had come to the wrong house. I gave him the address of Clarence and Grace and told him we were relocating there for our own safety until the house sold. On the way back to her parents' house, Bridget and I had talked about our sleeping arrangements for the next few weeks. She had a feeling that our bedrooms would be separate. We were happy to find that we were mistaken and that they had come to terms with the fact that we were a couple. Later on, when we reflect on that period of time, it will be with fond memories as we were both given a refresher course on how to maintain a marriage. We strengthened our relationship daily by incorporating the small lessons we learned from watching Bridget's parents interact. Making sure that we did not presume to know each other's opinions on anything that might become significant was one of the first things we worked on as a team. We were starting to finish each other's sentences, which made Bridget's parents laugh. We followed Bridget, who used the remote to rewind the show to start what she wanted to see, and a few minutes later, while I was still chatting with her parents, she came into her father's den all excited and said, "You two better come into the family room to see for yourself what just came over the news." When I discovered that Dena had traveled to Paris while carrying her boy toy under arrest, I was taken aback. There were 2 counts of arson against him. It seems he had hired a man to set fire to Bridget's house and the clinic. The man who was charged alongside him acknowledged that he had misidentified the house. "Why would he want to burn down Bridget's house if it wasn't to kill the 2 of you?" asked Gracie. "And who is he?" "There is something you need to see," I replied. "I'll be right back." Mom, Dad, what Trey is about to show you and explain can never go outside of this room because of the emotional pain it will cause for two of our friends, Bridget said as I was leaving the room. When I returned, I gave it to Clarence first, who looked it over and then gave it to his wife. My divorce lawyer discovered it when we got the medical records. We served the clinic with a court order for their records concerning my ex-wife. She had the abortion 8 weeks before she had her tubes tied. I'm going to go put this into the safe, said Clarence. I'm afraid if they can link the arson to Dena, it is going to come out anyway. It's sad that Dora and I may never know how much you're protecting them. After saying that, he returned to his den, Grace said. So that's why the divorce is sealed. Dena wanted to make sure that her parents would never know what she had done. Does she know you have this? I don't know, but she must be really concerned about the possibility. Otherwise, none of this would be happening, I replied. The only question is, does the tomboy realize how much he has been manipulated? Considering who he is, his monthly allowance would easily have covered the cost of this, said Bridget. Dena may be sitting pretty in the knowledge that she can't be connected to this. That woman will no longer be a problem for you too, I promise, Grace declared. No one puts my family in danger. By the time I am done with her, your divorce, Trey, will be a walk in the park. I turned to face Bridget, who had a serious look of concern on her face. She warned me off by shaking her head as I tried to speak. Afterwards, while we were cuddling on the bed, she said, there have been a very few times I have seen my mother with that look. Each time it happened, there was a threat to her sense of peace and security. She is going to do something to resolve the issue permanently. Dena won't be touched, but she will not be an ongoing problem. My mother used to be a character actress on the stage. I believe she is going to use those skills she developed back then to send a message to Dena that she will never forget. Hopefully, it will force Dena to speed things up. I'm ready for all of it to be put behind us, I replied. I was downstairs brewing coffee because I got up early and was getting ready for the day when this weird woman entered the kitchen. Who are you and what are you doing here? I responded. The woman chuckled and replied, I was hoping to be out before anyone got up, so promise me you will forget you ever saw me looking like this. It's taken me 3 hours to do the makeover and get dressed. Not a word will be mentioned about this, I promise. Bridget explained to me that you used to be in the theater back in the day, I replied. Thanks for getting my adrenaline going this morning. I won't even ask what you're up to. When I deliver the type of message like I am going to today, I make sure before I leave, they know what they see in front of them is an illusion. I will even change the sound of my voice 2 or 3 times to reinforce the seriousness of what I'm saying. That way, they will be forced to take very seriously what I have to say to them, Grace explained. Once I put the fear of God into them, I have never had a problem in my whole married life. It's not failed me once. Well, I will never forget that you could be standing in the same room with me without me knowing, I replied. It's a good thing I don't have a devious mind. I was in a rush for my daughter to get married because I wanted grandbabies to hold, Grace stated. Now I can honestly say I'm glad she didn't. You two met when you both were not really looking and fell in love for the right reasons. That is a blessing that Clarence and I shared when we started out. You two remind both of us when we were younger. In a couple of weeks, we will be flying back to attend a friend's anniversary. I explained at that time, Bridget will be meeting my parents. I've told them the whole story, so they are aware of everything. Keep it quiet for now because Bridget has not learned that part. Grace then left through the door. So that we could begin getting ready for the day, I brought 2 coffees upstairs to the bedroom. It was approximately 11 in the morning. In her new condo, Dena had just woken up when someone knocked on the door. Due to the amount she paid for the property, an insurance representative was present to inspect ECT and take pictures of the space. Once Dena let her in, the woman started taking pictures of the establishment as she prepared her first cup of coffee. At last, the woman spoke once more, but her tone had changed. Mrs. Richards, who is soon to be divorced, I am not an insurance representative. I am an agent who has been given a policy that has been taken out on you, she responded. You have stepped on and used one too many people to get you to the point where you are. Taking out a vial from her purse, the woman poured its contents over the wooden dining table, saying, "I have not been hired to kill, although I wish I had. The person or persons who have hired me want to make it clear." The woman repeated this statement in a different voice, saying that they have had enough of you. They have decided that you have to change your ways. It began consuming it. In shock, Dena stood there. "Remember, the next time you see me, I will not look or sound like this," said the woman. "You saw the damage I was able to do to your expensive table. Just remember this day, because the next time, I will be throwing it in your face," she continued. The woman grabbed the things she had entered with and left. When I returned later that evening, Grace was back and appeared to be her usual self. On Saturday and Sunday, Bridget and I went house hunting. We're going out for dinner with Emerson and Dora. They said they need to talk to us both. "I don't know what it's about, but I think something has happened," Bridget said over the phone at 4 o'clock on Monday. The hostess showed us to our private table as soon as we arrived. Dora was waiting with Emerson. Following our introductions and drinks orders, Dora said, "Dena has flown to California to look for a second residence. She is feeling the heat and wants to get out of the city. We feel something has happened that has changed her views of always being a New York girl. Maybe it's the fact that her current boy toy is looking at doing some time has forced her to want to put as much distance as is possible. I really have no clue as to what she's up to. She's become quiet and distant, as if something has shaken her reality to the bone," said Dora. "When I asked her about it, all she would say was, 'I did it to myself.' We went over to talk to her on the weekend and to see her new place," said Emerson. "It's a beautiful condo, but she is going to have to replace an expensive dining room set. It appears some kind of acid has destroyed the table. I asked her about it, and she refused to explain. I just thought Grace had delivered her message in such a way it had registered better than I imagined. Dena was making changes in her life for her own protection. My divorce lawyer called me on Tuesday afternoon, following the close of the stock market. A revised settlement offer had been sent to us by Dena's attorney. I was taken aback by what I was being offered, as was my lawyer. Dena even offered to cover my legal bills. As a result, I would come out of it better than I had thought," I replied. I told her to accept it before she changed her mind. "You understand, if the judge approves it, your enforcement will be done in less than 2 months, she continued. "Do you think it was her boy toy getting arrested that forced her to make you such a good settlement offer?" asked Bridget. "To be honest, I was told that someone sent her a message in a personal way after he had been arrested. Perhaps it was from someone from his side of the family. I learned last night she is in California looking for a new residence because she wants to spend more time there," I replied. That Thursday morning, as I looked over at Bridget, who was reading a book next to me on the plane to St. Louis, I realized how fortunate I was for what Dena's actions had brought me. Bridget and I had both quit our previous jobs. We would be vacationing in my former haunts for the next 2 weeks. The divorce would be finalized by the time we returned. When we would have moved in, our house would have been freshly painted. 2 days after I'd given Bridget the ring she wore on her left hand, her parents had surprised us with it. Less than 2 miles from their home, on a plot of land measuring 2.5 acres. I told Grace the reason she wanted in the neighborhood is that she wanted to babysit the grandkids, I replied. "You got that right. So when are you going to start working on them?" she responded. When we arrived at the airport in St. Louis, I said, "We got about a 45-minute wait before we have to catch our connector flight to the Cape. From there, it will be about a 45-minute drive for us to get to Marble Hill, where we will be staying. I'm looking forward to seeing where you grew up," she continued, "and to seeing some of my dad's side of the family while I am here. Do you have anything planned for us today after we get there?" "You'll find out as soon as we get off at Cape," I joked. When we landed in Cape Town, we crossed the pavement to get to the small terminal. As soon as we entered through the sliding doors, I could see my parents waiting for us. I looked like a younger version of my dad, and Bridget realized it. I introduced Bridget to my parents, Beth and Ben Richards, and as they approached us, he said in a deep voice, this beautiful lady must be the Bridget you told us all about. He said, you go pick up the luggage, I'll go get the truck. Dad and I carried the bags to the farm, and while Mom gave Bridget a quick tour of the house, she fell in love with the kitchen because it had an antique wood stove. Bridget inquired, do you still use it? Every winter, twice a week I bake the bread and buns for the week using that stove. It cuts down the electrical and heats the house. The rest of the time, I use it when doing roasts or other large cuts of meat, said Mom. When my mother started preparing lunch, she was overjoyed that Bridget enjoyed it and came in to assist her. After dinner, the four of us took Bridget on her first horseback ride on a trail I had frequented as a child. In order to avoid wearing her out, we ended it quickly. We showed her how to brush down the horses after removing the saddles. Observing her enthusiasm and engaging in what we deemed typical activities was enjoyable. We all responded to the many questions Bridget had. Looks like this time you got it right, said Dad as we trailed the women. Bridget and I had to explain how we had met after dinner. We answered all of my parents' inquiries and tried our best to answer their concerns. When they learned about the abortion, I believe they gave their full approval. A woman who can abort their unborn for any reason, my mother stated, has shown that she could justify killing their own spouse. That's the problem in society today, there is no respect for life in any way. In the privacy of our bedroom, Bridget and I talked about what our mother had said. My mother had been correct, as we both came to realize. We both decided that we would never talk about Dena to anyone again because we were over that phase of our lives. My engagement was approved 6 months ago. I performed a little ceremony with Bridget. My parents took a plane to attend the event. He had to see it to believe it, as my father had told everyone. Bridget has begun to show, and my mother-in-law is looking amazing. Now that Bridget is back at work, she's rushing around the city gathering the necessary supplies to open the best 2 nurseries in the area, one for her and one for us. In its most recent gossip column, the mighty New York Times revealed that Bridget is expecting twins. Since the New York Times, the nation's most liberal newspaper, is known for its honesty, it must be true. Please feel free to express your opinions in the space provided for comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.